Hello everyone and welcome back to this brand new video. In this lesson we are going to talk about how to create a node system in Unity. In this video we are going to set up the UI system, but for now I'm going to showcase the final version of this project. So I already prepared for this, so this is the end result of what we are going to do in this mini series. So what we're going to do is we are going to do a system where we can create nodes and pages, and we can view these, we can collect these nodes in game, and we can read them and store them in this kind of like a personal inventory system. And we can read through these nodes, through all of these pages. And we can also, for example, put like narration to maybe put some sound effects and stuff like that. Of course, I'm going to showcase the way the system works in just a moment. Alright, so first of all, let's head into the nodes folder. And as you can see here, we have 4 nodes that I created. So let's, for example, select this node, which only has 1 page. For example, this node has 2 pages and this node has 3 pages. So of course, the node can have as many pages as you want. So for example, you can press new, insert new to create a brand new page and insert it into the bottom of the list. You can also define a label of this node right here. You can of course drag and drop all of the pages, and what you can also do is you can view all of these pages by pressing this button. And as you can see, this is the page inspector, and you can now edit the node in any way you want. You can also press on this asset, and you can select this asset and you can view it individually, but I made it really simple so that you don't have to go and always select these pages. It's really easy because you can simply just press view and you can view the page inspector, right? Kind of merge the nodes inspector with a page inspector, which makes it really useful. Alright, but let's go into game mode and let's see how this entire node system looks in game.
Since 1995, gray wolves have been captured from Canada and brought to the United States to Yellowstone National Park. The wolf population is growing.
Alright, so this is what we are going to be making in this mini series. So let's go back into a brand new project and let's actually start setting up the UI system. Alright, so I am in the new project, and this is pretty much the empty project. Well, it's not empty, but there's no node system functionality nor any UI systems done. So we are going to do everything from scratch. The only thing I left is of course the demo scene, as well as some of the assets that we are going to be using inside of this in this mini series. For example, the audio, the font, and stuff like that, like the textures. So let's go into the scene and let's create a brand new object inside of the systems object. And a system object is simply just an empty object. And what we want to create is we want to create a brand new empty object. And let's call this something like a nodes system. So we are going to create 2 UI systems. It's going to be one for the list and then another one for the node. So we are going to be using the list UI system to display all of the picked nodes, and we are going to be using the nodes UI system to display the nodes and all of the pages. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a brand new canvas inside of the node system object. So let's go and let's create a brand new canvas, and let's call this something like a nodes system, a list canvas. So this canvas is going to be using an overlay render mode. The only thing that we are going to change, one thing that we need to add onto this game object is going to be the canvas group. So let's go and let's add this component. So the next thing that we need to create is going to be the background. Let's go and let's create a brand new image. Let's make this stretch to fill in the entire canvas. So let's go and let's rename this object to be something like background. Let's change the color of this image to something like black. And let's change the alpha value to something like 10 or like 25. Just a slight overlay that we need. And the next thing that we need to create is going to be the table background. So let's go and let's create a brand new image. And this can be something like a table background. What we can do is we can use the UI sprite image. So the only thing that we need to do is simply change the color of this image. So let's simply go and let's make this something like a dark gray color. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to, of course, scale this object. So the scale of this object is going to be something like 1440 in the width and 820 in the height. All right, and this is all we need to do with this object. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new object, which is going to be the Text Mesh Pro text. And before we do this, which is going to be the header, let's actually go and let's create some of the font assets that we can use. So I have imported a couple of fonts, which is Roboto Medium and Roboto Regular TTF files. So what we need to do now is we need to turn these files into the Text Mesh Pro font assets. So to do that, we need to go to Window, Text Mesh Pro, and Font Asset Creator. Then what we need to do is we need to select the font file, which is going to be, for example, this one. Then we simply need to drag and drop this file as a source file, and we simply need to press Generate Font Atlas. And now, as you can see, it created the font atlas, and now we can simply save this font atlas into the font asset. So let's simply press save, and let's simply save this font asset into the Text Mesh Pro folder. All right, so this is all we need to do. So let's simply delete this and let's reference the regular font file, and let's simply press Generate Font Atlas, and afterwards let's save it into the font asset. All right, and after we've done that, we can simply close down this window because we don't need it anymore. And now what we can do is we can go back to the header, and what we can do now is we can actually reference the font asset as our font asset. So let's simply go into the Text Mesh Pro folder where we saved all of our font assets, and let's, for example, use this Roboto Medium font asset. All right, so as you can see, we are now using the Roboto Medium font asset. So what we need to do now is we need to, for example, change the text to something like notes. Then what we need to do is we need to anchor this text object to the top left corner. So let's simply press Shift and Alt, and let's press on this anchor. All right. So the X position is going to be something like 50. The width, we can leave it as it is, as well as the height. All right. So let's change some of the settings. The first thing that we need to change is the font size. So as a size, I want to use something like 25. Then the color, I want to use something like medium gray. So let's simply go and let's change the color to something like 50. And the last thing that I want to change is some alignment. I want to leave it as to be anchored at the left corner, but I want this to be aligned in the middle. So let's simply press this middle anchor. Now the next thing that we need to add is going to be the empty game object. Or actually, let's create a brand new image, which is going to be called something like holder. And this image is going to be the holder area. So the first thing that we want to do is let's change the width to something like 1340 and 40. And the height, let's change it to 720, for example. So let's change the color to something like really dark gray. So let's make it something like 5, and let's also change the alpha to 50. So something like this. The next thing that we want to add onto this game object is going to be the rec mass 2D. The next thing that we want to add is going to be the scroll rec component. So this is only going to be the vertical scroll. So let's simply disable the horizontal. The movement type, let's change it to clamped, and the scroll sensitivity to something like 25. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to add the scroll bar. So let's simply go and let's add a brand new scroll bar, which is going to be this one. Alright, so the first thing that we need to make sure is that the direction of the scroll bar is from bottom to top. The next thing that we want to do is we want to anchor this object to stretch on the right. So let's simply press Shift Alt and let's press on this anchor. Let's change the width of this object to be something like 25 pixels. Let's remove the source image because we don't need it. Let's change the color of this image to something like 10 and 50. Let's change the colors of the handle to something like all white. Let's first of all change the normal color. It needs to be something like completely white but in 10 alpha value. So something like this. And then the highlighted color, let's leave it to something like 25 and completely white. Then for the pressed color, let's leave it white but slightly lighter as the normal color, so something like 15. For the selected color, let's leave it completely the same as the normal color, so something like 10. And for the disabled color, let's make it completely invisible. Alright, so the last thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't use any navigation. So let's simply press navigation and let's select none. Alright, and what I want to do also is I want to go to the handle, and what I want to do is I want to make this handle a slightly thinner. So let's simply drag and let's make this a slightly thinner, so something like this. Alright, and this is how it looks like. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a brand new empty game object. So let's simply go and let's create a brand new empty object, and let's call this object to something like content. And this is where we're going to store all of our list elements. And this object needs to be stretched to the top. Alright, and this is all we need to do with our list canvas. So what we need to do now is we need to create the node selection prefab, which is going to be the list element. So let's go here and let's create a brand new image. Let's make this image stretch to the top. Let's make this image to stretch to the top. And let's rename this to be something like node selection prefab. Let's make the height of this object to be something like 45.5. Then let's set the color of this image to be something like darker gray, something like 20. Then let's turn this image to be a clickable element. So let's add the button component. And for now, let's just leave it as it is. So what we need to do now is we need to create a couple of sub elements. And the first element that we need to create is going to be the label. So let's create a brand new TextMesh Pro object. Let's make this object to stretch to fill in this entire selection rectangle. For the left offset, let's put it to something like 35. For the right offset, let's put it to something like 50. Alright, so for the font asset, I want to use the regular Roboto font asset. For the font size, I want to do something like 25. For the alignment, I want this text to be aligned at the left side, but to be aligned in the middle. And what I want to do also is I want to add the really slight dilate, something like 0.1. And that is all we need to do with this text object. So let's go and let's rename this object to be label. And now let's create a brand new object, which is going to be the image. Let's make this object to be anchored at the left side. So let's press Shift and Alt and let's press on this anchor. Alright, so let's make this to be 10 by 10 pixels. But actually 15 by 15 is probably better. Then let's use the knob texture. Let's make this element to be somewhere in the middle, somewhere at 10 pixels. And let's change the color of this knob to be something like green, something like this. And this is going to be the indicator. And what that means is that we're going to add a brand new node. Indicator is going to be enabled. The way we are going to do this is that every time you're going to read the node, which is the new picked node, this indicator is going to be disabled. So it's kind of to indicate the new picked nodes. Alright, so the very last thing that we want to add is going to be the arrow. So let's press on the image. Let's create a brand new image. Let's make this image to be anchored at the right side. So for the size, I want this to be 20 by 20 pixels, or actually 20 by 25 pixels. Then I want to use the source image as the next arrow key, which is something like this. Of course, if you're going to get all the files, you're also going to get all of the textures. Alright, so now let's go back to, actually let's rename this to something like arrow. And now let's go back to our node selection prefab. And let's configure this button component. So for the target graphic, I want to use the arrow. I don't want to use any navigation. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to configure all of the colors. So first of all, I want to make all of the colors completely white. So let's go through all of the colors and let's make them white. And the only thing that we are going to change is the alpha value. Alright, so first of all, let's make the disabled color to be completely invisible. Then let's make the normal color to be something like 25 in alpha value. The highlighted color to be something like 65 in alpha value. The pressed color to be something like 50. And the selected color to be something like 65. And that is all we need to do with this button component. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to fix one of the issue. As you can see, currently the list element is overlapping with the scroll bar. So what we need to do is we need to select the content object and we want to make this slightly smaller in width to kind of give it a little bit of offset. And now, as you can see, it works perfectly. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to go to the prefabs folder and let's simply drag and drop this node selection prefab and let's make this into a prefab. So now we can simply delete this. Let's make the content height to be 0. So this is all we need to do with our list canvas. So now we can simply collapse this and make this invisible. And what we need to do now is we need to do another canvas, which is going to be for our node system. So we are going to use that other canvas, the one that we're going to create right now, to display the node. So let's go and let's create a brand new canvas. And let's rename this canvas to be something like nodes system node canvas. Alright, so the thing that you want to change inside of this object is first of all, let's go to the canvas scaler component. And let's make sure that the UI scale mode is scale with screen size. And the reference resolution we are going to put to 1920 and 1080. And let's make the match to be 1, which is 100%. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to add another component onto this game object. And the component that we want to add is going to be the canvas group. Alright, so the first element that we want to add is the black screen. So let's create a brand new image and let's make this stretch to fill in this entire canvas. Let's call this something like black screen. And of course, the color of this image is going to be black and the alpha value is going to be something like 50. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a brand new image. And this image is going to be called a paper or a page, but let's call it paper. And for the width and the height, I want it to be something like 768 and 950 on the height. Alright, so for the source image, I want to use the paper image that I provided. It's really a simple image, it's simply just a paper. And this is all we need to do. So what we need to do now is we need to create a brand new element inside of this paper, which is going to be holder element. Let's create a brand new empty object and let's call this something like holder. Let's make this element to be stretched to fill in this entire rectangle. For the offset, let's make it something like 65, 65, So something like this. So 65 and 65 in both sides, which is the left and the right side, and 89 in top and 72 in on the bottom. Alright, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a brand new component, which is going to be the rec mass 2D, as well as the scroll rec component. And I just remembered that inside of the list, we haven't actually referenced the content. So let's simply go to our holder, and as you can see, we haven't referenced the content object. So let's simply go and let's reference this content game object. Alright, so now we can collapse this. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to disable, first of all, the horizontal axis. We need to change the movement type to clamped, the scroll sensitivity to something like 25. And I just remembered we forgot to do one more thing, which is to reference the scroll bar. So let's simply go and let's reference that, and let's leave it as permanent. Let's collapse this, and inside of here, this is exactly what we are going to do as well. So first of all, let's create a brand new object, which is going to be the empty object. Let's make this object to stretch to the top. Let's add the image component, and the sprite that we want to use is going to be the line sprite, as you can see right here. For the image type, let's use it as tiled. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to make the color to be in 25% alpha value, something like this. And let's rename this object to be something like lines, or actually content. Inside of this content object, let's create a brand new TextMesh Pro object. Let's reference the Roboto regular font asset. Let's make the font size to be 25 pixels. Let's leave the alignment as it is. And for the line spacing, let's make it 13 pixels. Alright, so what we need to do then is we need to go to our content object, and let's add the vertical layout group component. Let's make the control child size to be enabled on the width and the height. And the next thing that we need to add is going to be the content size fitter. And for the vertical fit, let's make it to preferred size. So what is going to happen right now? Alright, so the next thing that we need to do, let's go to our text object, and let's change the vertex color to be something like dark gray. Alright, so what this will do is that, let's say for example, we're going to add more text, let's say something like this. As you can see, as we add text, we also make these lines. But at the moment, as you can see, it is not really precise. The spacing is not really correct. And the thing that we need to change is the line spacing. It really depends on your UI setup. If you completely follow this video step by step, then whatever I will put into this input, this is what you should put. But you have to look and see if this is kind of works for you. If it doesn't work, then you have to try and see what value is the best. Alright, as you can see, at the moment everything seems to be quite alright. So if we add text, this is how it's going to look like. And now as you can see, the spacing works quite alright. And this is the value that I used for the line spacing. Of course, if this doesn't work for you, then you have to try a different value to see what works for your UI system. So this is a bit of a trial and error process, but it's not that hard to kind of get this right. But what we need to do now is we need to change the text, this text object's name to be something like text. And what we need to do now is we need to go to our holder element, and let's make the content of the scroll rec component to be the content. Alright, so what we need to do now is we need to create a scroll bar. So let's go here and let's create a brand new scroll bar. So the first thing that we need to make sure is that the direction is from bottom to top. Then what we need to do is we need to change the image to be something like a UI sprite, because I think that looks a bit better. And then what we need to do is we need to change the color of this image, and the color that I want to use is going to be 25 or 20, or maybe 25 is a bit better. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to make this scroll bar element to stretch to the right, and I want to position this element somewhere around here and to be the size of the holder in height, so something like this. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to go to the handle, which is the handle image, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to change the source image to be none, so to not use any source image. The next thing that I want to do is I want to make the color inside of this scroll bar component, the normal color, to be something like, let's see, something maybe a bit lighter gray color, maybe something like this. I think that looks quite alright. Then the highlighted color, I want it to be something like completely white, or maybe something like 65. Then the pressed color to be maybe completely white, and the selected color to be completely the same as the highlighted color. And the last thing is of course the disabled color, and for that I want it to be completely invisible. Then let's change the navigation to none, and the fade duration to something like a smaller value, something like 0.025, something like this. And that is kind of all we need to do with our scroll bar. So let's go to our holder and let's reference the vertical scroll bar, which is going to be this one. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to actually change the visibility to auto height. So if our content does not go outside of the holder, then our scroll bar is going to be invisible, which is going to be disabled. Alright, so the next thing that we need to do is going to be the Subscript UI elements. So first of all, let's create a brand new image. Let's make this image to stretch to fill in this entire canvas. And let's make the color of this image to be something like 5 and 99 in alpha value, something like this. Let's call this something like a subscript group. Then what we need to do is we need to add the canvas group component. Then the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a brand new empty game object, and let's call this something like holder. Let's make the width of this element to be something like 720 and the height to be something like 747 or maybe 750, so something like this. And let's leave the anchor as it is. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to add a couple of components onto this game object. The first one is the rec mask 2D, as well as the scroll rec component. So just like we did with other systems, we also need to create a brand new object, which is going to be the child of the holder object. And this object is going to be the content object. And what we need to do is we need to add the vertical layout group. Let's make the control child size to be enabled on the width and the height. Let's add the content size fitter component, and let's make this vertical fit to be preferred size. Then what we need to do is we need to make this content to be stretched to the top. Alright, so afterwards let's create a brand new TextMesh Pro object. Let's configure some of the settings, such as the font asset to be irregular, the font size to be something like 30, the alignment to be at the center as well as at the top. Let's leave the color as it is, and that's pretty much all we need to do with this object. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to change the name of this text object to be something like Subscript. Alright, afterwards let's create a brand new object which is going to be the scroll bar. So let's create that. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to remove the image, and I also want to make this image to be invisible. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to change the direction to be from bottom to top. Then I want to make this scroll bar to stretch to the right. So let's simply press Shift and Alt and let's press on this anchor. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to go to the handle of the scroll bar, and I want to make this a slightly thinner. So let's simply move this like this, and that is all we need to do. So now it looks just a slightly better. Alright, so now let's go back to our holder element. Let's reference the content to be the content. Then let's change the movement type to be clamped. We only want to have the vertical scroll, so let's disable the horizontal one. And we also want to change the scroll sensitivity to something like 25, and we also want to reference our scroll bar, which is our vertical scroll bar. And that is all we need to do. And another thing that I want to do is I want to make this content object to be just slightly smaller in width, so something like this. And what I also want to do is in holder scroll rec component, I want to make the visibility to auto hide, so something like this. Of course, this is really basic UI system. You can make this completely different and much better, but this is completely different topic. We just want to make something so that we could test our functionality. So now let's remove the text because we don't really need it. And that is all we need to do. So I think we are done with everything. So now we can simply collapse this. And the last thing that we need to create is going to be the buttons. So let's create a brand new empty object, which is going to be the holder where we're going to store all of our buttons. So let's make this object to stretch to fill in this entire canvas. Let's call this something like buttons. Actually, what we need to do also is let's make this subscript group to be completely invisible. So we are going to create 4 buttons, the close button, the read button, and the arrow keys to navigate between pages. So the first button is going to be the close button. So let's create a brand new Text Mesh Pro button. Let's make this to be somewhere right here. And let's actually press on the paper. And let's raise this element up on the y-axis to be something like this. Alright, then let's go back to our button and let's resize this element to be something like 65 and 200 in width. So something like this. Let's remove the source image. So make it just a simple rectangle. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to configure the colors of this button. So for the normal color, let's leave it to 25. For the highlighted color, let's make it to 15. For the pressed color, let's make it also 25. Let's also do the same for the selected color. And for the disabled button color, let's make it to 50% alpha value and 25 in the how dark it is. Let's disable the navigation, and that is all we need to do. So now the next thing we need to do is we need to go to our text object and let's change this to something like close. Then the next thing is of course the font asset, and I want to use the medium font asset. For the font size, I want to be something like 22.5. For the vertex color, I want it to be something like 85 in how dark it is. So it's something like this. Alright, and this is pretty much all I want to do. Actually, what I also want to do is I want to change the normal color to be something like 50% of alpha value. And I want to do that exactly the same thing in the press color as well as the selected color. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to make this button to be anchored at the lower center anchor. Then let's rename this button to be something like button and close, just to make it a bit clearer on what this actually is. And let's rename this text object to be something like label. Alright, so let's create a brand new button. And this is going to be exactly the same thing as this button. So let's simply press Ctrl and D to duplicate. Then what we need to do is we need to anchor this to the top right corner. So let's press Shift and Alt and let's press on this anchor. And then for the X and Y position, I want it to be something like -30 and also -30 in Y position. So something like this. And the only thing I want to change is simply the name of this object to be button read, as well as of course the label to be read. So we're going to press on this button to read the content of the page, so to view the subscript. All right. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a couple of more buttons, and the first button is going to be the next arrow. And the next one is going to be the previous page arrow. So let's simply go and let's create this button, and let's simply say that this is going to be the button next. So for the X position, I want it to be something like 527. Then for the width, I want it to be 85. And for the height, I want it to be something like 125. All right. Then I want to anchor this in the middle and right. So this one. Then for the source image, I want to use the next arrow, which is this one. Then of course we need to make this as a button. So we need to add the button component onto this object. So the first thing we need to do is we need to say that the normal color is going to be a white color with but with 50% of alpha value, so something like this. Then the highlighted color, let's leave it as it is. Actually, let's make it completely white. Then the pressed color, let's make it white but in 25 alpha value. And let's make then the selected color to be completely white and the disabled color to be completely invisible. All right, so for the fade duration, let's make it to something like 0.5, and for the navigation, let's make it to none. All right, so what we need to do then is we need to add the canvas group component onto this object, and this is what we are going to use to disable and enable this button. So as you can see right here. All right, so the next thing is of course duplicating this button, and this is going to be the button to go to the previous page in our note. So let's say it is going to be a previous button. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to make this anchored to the left middle side, so something like this. And for the X position, we need to make this something like this. So a completely the same value, but except it's not negative but a positive value. All right, so the last thing that I want to do is I want to go to the read button, and I want to add the canvas group component onto this object, and that is all we need to do. So let's make our next and previous buttons to be not interactable at the start. Let's also make this note and list canvases to be completely invisible and non-interactable, and that is all we need to do for our UI system. So in the next video, we are going to start creating the node systems functionality. If you want to get all of the files of this project, you can go into the description and you can press on the link which will take you to my Patreon page where you can get all of the files of this project. But other than that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you very soon in the next lesson.